How did we get here? I never would have imagined I would be where I am today. That certainly wasn't the plan, but I know one thing, I'm never going back. This is my story. This is our story. My dad taught me if I wanted anything in this life, I was going to have to work for it and work hard. I appreciate the work ethic he instilled in me. My dad grew up as a dirt poor tobacco sharecropper's son during the Great Depression era of 1929 in the Appalachian Mountains of Mount Airy, North Carolina. He was one of 5 boys, the only one in his family that made it out of those mountains and earned a high degree of education in an entirely different lifestyle than he had grown up with. He grew up without electricity, running water, an outhouse, or privy as they called it then, a dirt floor, and hard work and sacrifice just to put food on the table. My dad believed in education as a key to opportunity, so when he was 18 years old, he left with a buddy to join the Navy and get an education, the only way he could afford one. As a kid, he made sure to deeply ingrain in me his values of hard work, education, and sacrifice to get what you wanted in life. I learned if I wanted the American dream, it wasn't going to be handed to me, and he made us kids work for everything we wanted. When I was a young boy growing up in Winter Park, Florida, I remember I wanted some money to go buy some candy and a model rocket at the local toy and hobby chest, a store of glorious toys and things a young boy could make and race, that he could paint and build and then blow sky high. I was in paradise in that store. Charlie, my best friend, and I used to buy model rockets, put them together, paint them up and blast them several thousand feet into the air, and then chase after them, recover them, do it over and over again. I guess it's a boy thing, but it was great fun. But it took money, and my dad started at a young age making me work for my money. We didn't get an allowance like kids do now. So I started a lawn mowing business. I went down to the local office store and got a rubber stamp made and took heavy red craft paper, cut it up to look like business cards, and I stamped those cards out. From the time I was 13 on, I worked mowing lawns and clearing lakefronts. I charged about $100 to do that, which was way too cheap, considering the Florida hot sun and all those snakes I had to deal with. Just from mowing yards, there were Saturdays I'd come home with about $120 in my pocket. That was big money back then. I always had a way to make money, and I was always working from that point in time. I worked all the way through middle school and high school, mostly mowing lawns and doing landscaping. I worked at the original Melting Pot as a dishwasher and then a salad maker and kitchen manager. I had a paper route that had 500 clients. I even sold books door to door. I sold a student handbook set and children's books in the fields of Iowa, if you can imagine, going all the way out there. And I did that one summer between high school and college, right before I came back to start college, and met Sandy at a church retreat in November 1978. We were both 19 years old then. During that time, I went away to college, and when I came back on a summer break, Sandy fell in love with me. I was already in love with her and had been from the moment I laid eyes on her. But now it was mutual. That's another story. And we decided our next step was to get married. We were both 21. Sandy and I both lived with our parents, so when we got married, I didn't want to throw money away on renting something we didn't own. So I bought a brand spanking new trailer. Call it a mobile home, I guess. It was 14 feet wide by 70 feet long. We had a total of 980 square feet, not bad for starting out. It had 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, a small but decent kitchen, a dining room, and a family room. It even had an inside laundry room. What more could you ask for, right? But like they say, it ain't home until you take the wheels off. I bought that trailer about a month before we got married. At that time, my boss, who owned a nursery out in Timbuktu, had offered to let me live there rent-free, so I jumped at it. We got married, put all we owned in it, and went on our honeymoon. One afternoon, after work, I went by our trailer to discover that it had been broken into. Everything had been stolen. We had been wiped out, except for just a few pieces of furniture. It's a good thing we still had the wheels on that thing, because I had to move that trailer. It cost me $500, but it was worth every penny I spent, because Sandy was unwilling to set her foot in that trailer after we had been robbed. I don't blame her one bit. We got married in my second year of college, and I had 2 years left. We had the most noble of plans to wait to start our little family until after I'd finished college and had a job. But Sandy got pregnant about 6 months after we were married, so I doubled up on my course load to finish by the time our son was born. I did nothing but work, study, sleep, and eat. Well, I didn't sleep much. I remember the week of July 27, 1982 very well. I had 6 final exams that week to finish my college education. And right in the middle of that week of exams on a Tuesday, our precious son Ryan was born. So life was good. I finished my final exams, I graduated that weekend, and I started my first job the following Monday. No rest for the weary, and we needed the money. I got a job as an entry-level financial analyst at Martin Marietta. Later, they merged with Lockheed to become Lockheed Martin. Yeah, I was taught if I worked hard, got a good education, and never stopped working hard, that I too could live the American dream. And I was doing it. But that was all I was taught. I wasn't taught how to handle money, not even the basics. Everything I learned was from my own experience. I was taught how to manage a company, accounting principles, financial strategy, risk management, budgeting, leverage. But one very important thing they did not teach me was the proper perspective on debt. We moved from our mobile home to our first brick and mortar home, rented the mobile home out for a while, then sold it. Then we bought our next home using the equity of our first home to buy it, kept it a while as a rental, and then sold it for a profit. Each time we moved up to a bigger home, leveraging the equity in our prior home. By 1996, 15 years after we got married, we bought 2 acres of lakefront property in Central Florida to build our dream home. The whole leveraging thing was working out. By this time, I was very successful in my career at Lockheed. I was part of a team that managed a $1.7 billion portfolio of companies Lockheed had acquired, and I ended up working on a deal to sell one of the companies to a $3 billion IT outsourcing company in Dallas, Texas called Affiliated Computer Services in 2003. Shortly after, I became the Vice President of Finance for their eastern region of the United States. A few years later, in 2010, that company merged with Xerox to become Xerox Business Services. I assumed the role of their Vice President and CFO of their Global Services Operations and Engineering organization. My personal business plan was to continue leveraging my assets. I had a goal of buying 1 rental property a year for the next 10 years. Then at the end of the 10 years, I was going to liquidate everything and ride off into the sunset. By this time, I had 3 rentals and was looking for more. I was making a pretty decent amount of money, living in a home that was worth over $1 million and had real estate worth over $2 million. We lived without any restraint on our spending because we could. 2 of our 3 children had finished their education and were married and started their families. We had our health and many good friends. We were happy. While I felt very much like God had blessed us and favored us, there was a storm brewing. But what we didn't know was that we were heading right into the perfect storm. In 1996, after spending the weekend watching my daughter's basketball tournament in a gym, I contracted a severe bacterial infection that almost took my life. My leg blew up at least twice its normal size, leaving me in agonizing pain as the doctors were rushing to save my body from sepsis and certain death. Within hours of a point of no return, the infectious disease doctors assigned to my case finally found a concoction of antibiotics that started turning it back. After what seemed to be an eternity, but was only about 2 weeks, I left that hospital, but I left that place scarred. I would soon find out that the infection had destroyed my lymphatic system and veins on the left side of my body, and I would have to deal with many reoccurrences and pain through the years that would dramatically affect my career and my trajectory in life. At work, things were busier than ever. Work stress was constantly rising due to increased profit expectations and the resulting required layoffs that were orchestrated to make our goals. Then the recession hit in 2008. Real estate collapsed in Florida as it did across all the nation. By the time 2008 had come, I had amassed over $2 million in real estate, mostly in Florida. By the time it had reached the bottom, my real estate investments had decreased in value by more than 2/3. The $1 million home that we had lived in was now a huge boat anchor around our neck. We continued on, hoping against hope that the recession would ease up and recover and I would be able to outlast it and hold on to it until the values came back up. But the longer it went on, the more it became clear that that wasn't going to happen anytime soon that I could see. It all came to a climax one day after we faced another quarterly layoff in the fourth quarter of 2012. I saw this as a no-win situation. So on a cool fall day in September 2012, Sandy and I had lunch and decided that day to take a leap of faith to call it quits. To the constant spinning of plates, the servicing of debt, the stress that was killing me. So on January 4th, 2013, I ended my corporate career after nearly 31 years. The next year was quite a roller coaster. Over the years, I had a lot of my identity as a man invested in the person I had become at work. Now all of that identity was gone. My own financial future was at stake, and I saw what I had worked so hard for crumbling around me. I wasn't able to hold on as I got slapped with lawsuit after lawsuit. At one point in time, I faced 6 lawsuits. We held on as long as we could. We shared our struggle with only a few close friends. I've really felt ashamed, a sense of guilt for letting this happen. Who could have ever seen it coming? If my plan had worked, I would have swung for the bleachers and knocked it out of the park. But after the reality of the 2008 recession had taken its toll, I saw it clearly. I had let debt become my close companion and friend, a tool, a very dangerous tool. To be totally honest, the struggle each day was very real. Great anxiety and depression would overtake me and paralyze me. I looked for any scrap of hope. For the first time in my life, everything seemed so uncertain. Then in February of 2014, I had another health storm. I woke up one morning and started hallucinating. To make things worse, I started looping, repeating the same things over and over. Sandy called the kids and took me to the hospital. It was a scary time. They found a hole in my heart that had allowed unoxygenated blood to get to my brain. Sandy and I had hung on to each other, but the load was affecting our marriage. We were sad, distressed, and some days in great crisis. Sandy was awesome through all of this. She was my coach and comforter. When I was down, she was up. She was always up. She encouraged me on many a day, spoke life to me, telling me it was going to be all right. She didn't really get down from losing possessions. She focused on what truly mattered in life. Through all of this, she steadied me in the storm. Her words were life to me. On November 30th, 2016, 4 years after our journey had begun, Sandy and I sat down and signed bankruptcy papers. It was our last resort. I had a mountain of debt that I could no longer pay off if I worked my entire life. In pain, I was done. We had to learn to make radical adjustments. Our savings was almost depleted several times, but God was faithful. Right just when we were about to run out, something would happen, more money would come in, and we'd be okay again. We learned at a new level how to trust God. We had to give up our do anything we wanted attitude. We had to make some extreme cutting. Our priorities had gotten out of whack. My identity had too. We simplified our life and had to shed some wrong thinking about what was important. Part of our healing journey was finding morning coffee with Steve McVey. By November 2016, at the time we had pulled the trigger on our bankruptcy, Sandy happened to connect with Steve on Facebook. She started listening to his 101 Lies You Hear in Church, and eventually she connected on the morning coffee. She got me to listen, then eventually we started listening to Steve every morning as he was just talking to a few folks that would gather online each morning. A lot of people were like us, broken, but they were looking for some authenticity. Steve spoke to me. His words were healing to me. He gave me hope. Unknowingly, he was shining the light out of the dark pit I was in and showing me, reminding me how much my Heavenly Father loved me and that He had been there the whole time and that He was standing there with me through all of this mess. We're still not done with that bankruptcy, but for the most part, it's over. But it's not closed. Our life can't go on yet, but the end is in sight. We're learning to live out of the tree of life. We're learning to rest in the simplicity of the completeness of what Christ did for us on the cross and to find great contentment in that. We're living on cash and loving the freedom that not being in debt brings. These last years have been tough, but they've moved us toward two very important things: peace and freedom. My heart is to help others that have also made financial mistakes like we have. They don't know what to do or how to do it. They just know that they can't stay where they're at. And they also want peace and freedom. We want to pass along the lessons all of this has taught us. You know, I'm sure there's much more to learn and experience for us. We're on a journey, but we've been set free and we will never go back to the bondage that we were in again. It was for this freedom that Christ set us free, completely liberating us. Therefore, keep standing firm and don't be subject again to a yoke of slavery.